My ex called me a loser. Now her child calls me dad. It does not begin with fire. There is no sword raised to the sky, no fist clenched in rage, no battle cry, no thundering declaration of revenge. Only silence, a silence so deep it has weight. A silence that presses against the bones like ancient gravity. Above a broken sky bleeds colorless light. Stars drift like ash in reverse, not falling, but retreating, fleeing something they've already seen before. Below, a dark plain stretches into the endless horizon, barren, still, and cold, with the memory of forgotten names. This is where he stands. Not a man, not anymore. He is the echo of a person once declared obsolete, a discarded thread in the grand weave of civilization. Once laughed at, once ignored, once told, not with cruelty but with indifference, you don't matter, and yet he remains. Somewhere in the endless calculus of human failure, he was left behind. Not by fate, but by the ones who assumed they were moving forward. She said it first. The words, sharp as sterilized metal, clean and final. You're a loser. It was not a scream. It was not rage. It was worse. It was factual. A closing statement at the end of a trial. He did not realize he was on. And in that moment, something inside him folded, not shattered. That would have been merciful. Instead, it folded inward, crumpled into a space so small it could hide inside a whisper. The kind of whisper no one ever listens to. There is something sacred about being unwanted. Something ancient. The mythmakers once wrote of banished kings, blind prophets, and fallen angels, not because they were strong, but because they were removed, severed, pulled out of the world like rotten teeth, only to grow again in the dark. Soil where gods forget to look, and so he stood on the edge of the algorithm, the edge of relevance, and then he fell. But in that descent, something awoke. Not rage, not revenge, but purpose. It was not a loud awakening. No celestial voice called his name, no choir of revelation, only stillness. And within that stillness, a question whispered through. The corridors of time. What if the thing you lost became the thing that saved you? There are civilizations buried beneath emotion, feelings so deep they become cities of memory. And in those ruins, beneath shame and silence, purpose finds its roots. They called him a loser, a man of no worth, too quiet, too soft, too slow. He
did not command a room. He did not conquer wealth. He did not radiate the curated brilliance of modern manhood. And so, he was set aside. But the world does not understand what it discards. For even in exile, the soil remembers the seed. In the mythos
of the ancients, there is a pattern. The hero is not always born. Sometimes he is left, forgotten in a cradle of shadows. And from those shadows he listens, he watches, and slowly, patiently, he learns how to make silence sing. His name disappeared from searches, his face no longer tagged in memories, his voice uninvited from rooms of power. But in that void, he built something no one saw coming, a soul immune to spectacle. There are no celebrations for the invisible, no applause for the unseen. But there is freedom. And with that freedom, something strange and beautiful begins to take shape. Purpose, not loud, but undeniable. It starts in small, imperceptible ways. A thought repeated until it becomes architecture. A failure studied until it becomes scripture. A scar traced until it reveals a map. And the map leads inward. In this sacred silence, beneath the noise of a world obsessed with optics and speed, a question grows into a cathedral. When society throws you away, what grows in your silence? The answer is not a slogan. It is not vengeance. It is not a comeback story to impress the ones who left. It is something older, something wiser, something terrifyingly calm. He does not need the world to see him anymore, because he has become the watcher. Not of people, but of meaning. He watches the way truth bends under convenience. He watches how love becomes currency. He watches how the loudest are praised while the deepest are buried. And in this watching, he begins to build. No audience, no performance, only structure, only stillness, only sacred, stubborn presence. And though he speaks to no one, the universe listens. Not because he is special, but because he is still here. They told him he was worthless, but in the void of their absence he found something no one else was searching for. A hidden doorway between shame and becoming. A place where the soul is no longer measured in achievement or applause. Place where purpose does not beg to be seen. He enters it like a monk enters ritual. Quiet, resolute, unbothered by the world's impatience. And from within that space, a presence begins to bloom. Not to punish, not to prove, but to be, and in being, he begins the slow, sacred rewrite of what was once declared dead. The child he will one day raise does not know yet. The woman who once laughed at his dreams does not see what grows in her shadow. And the world, busy with its performance, will not hear the echo until it becomes a roar. But it will come, for something ancient has been seeded in exile, and it no longer asks for permission to bloom. Memory does not arrive like a timeline. It fractures. It bleeds, out in flickers and static, like corrupted footage projected onto the walls of a dying cathedral. Each moment distorts in transit, warped by grief, stretched by shame, refracted by time. There is no order to pain, only echoes, and in the silence of exile, those echoes become hymns, unholy and unresolved. He remembers, but not like most do, not with warmth or clarity or closure. He remembers in shards, a cracked window pane, rain dripping sideways across glass, her voice behind the veil. You always have ideas, never results. A gentle phrase, weaponized by tone. It did not slice, it soaked into him, slow and cold, like rot beneath the skin. Another shard, laughter in another room. Not with him, never because of him. He was adjacent to joy, never its source. He was a placeholder, a man waiting to be replaced by someone more acceptable, someone louder, richer, realer. And so the world began its erasure, not with fury, but with omission. He stopped being invited, not to events, but to relevance. His questions were left unread, his insights smiled at, then shelved. He became the man people talked around, not with, not because he was wrong, but because he made others uncomfortable. With his softness, his stillness, his dreams too vast to monetize. Dreams. That's where it began. He had them. Too many. He spoke of building things that didn't exist, of systems that couldn't fail because they were designed not from profit, but from poetry. He mapped futures in notebooks no one ever opened. He designed algorithms to heal, not manipulate. And for this, he was mocked. The labels came like flies to an open wound. Failure, useless, overthinker, dreamer. The worst wasn't the words themselves, but the shrug with which they were delivered. No malice, just disinterest. As if the death of his potential were a scheduling inconvenience, not a tragedy. This is how collapse happens, not with thunder, but with shrugs. And yet, beneath the decay, something stirred. Despair. Yes, but also something else, something embryonic, quiet, refusing to die. Hope? No, older than hope, older than emotion. A hunger, not for revenge, but for meaning. The world had thrown him out, not from its streets, but from its stories. He was no longer a character in anyone's narrative. He was scenery. Filler. The man, whose name you forget 5 seconds after shaking his hand, and yet he did not disappear. He recorded every rejection, every casual dismissal, every moment where belief in him cracked and caved under the weight of someone else's boredom. He recorded, not with pen or camera, but with being. He became a vessel for memory, a vessel for all the men who were never invited to the myth of success. Memory then becomes mutation. It shifts shape. It begins to hum, like metal in deep cold, and in that hum, song is born. A song with no melody, no chorus, only resonance, a resonance of what could have been, of what still might be. Pain, refined over time, becomes music, not for others to hear, but for the self to survive. He sang with no sound. He danced with no rhythm. He became his own cathedral, not holy, but haunted. Each memory that once stabbed now served as stained glass, fractured, yes, but catching light in strange and sacred ways. He looked back not to mourn, but to build. Build from the wreckage, build through the ache. Each insult became mortar, each failure, foundation, each tear, a baptism into the quiet religion of still being here. This is not the story of revenge. This is not a man who returns with fire. This is a man who returns with roots, because memory, when carried long enough, stops being weight. It becomes direction. She once looked at him with eyes that said, "I wish you were someone else." But he does not look back with rage. He looks back with understanding, because he, too, once wished to be someone else. Someone seen. Someone chosen. Someone enough. But now, he sees the gift in being unseen, the freedom in being unchosen, the alchemy in being forgotten. Because in the absence of expectations, he found the infinite, not in power, but in presence. A presence carved not from victory, but from persistence. He is no longer waiting for validation. He is no longer auditioning for love. He is building something the world has no language for yet. And it began with memory, a wound. That learned to sing. They will say it was coincidence. That. He simply failed. That heartbreak is random, rejection is natural. Loneliness, just a byproduct of poor choices and misaligned fate. But they are wrong, because beneath the veil of every broken dream lies a system, an architecture of erasure, an algorithm, not coded by malice, but by indifference, designed not to destroy, but to exclude, with silent efficiency, with cold grace, with mathematical certainty. He was not destroyed by her words. He was processed, scanned, sorted, categorized, and discarded. The algorithm did not need to hate him. It only needed to calculate that he did not perform. Performance was everything. Not integrity, not imagination, not soul. Performance in the metrics. That mattered to the machine. Visibility, virality, utility, immediate gratification. And he was none of these. He dreamed too slowly, spoke too softly, moved with questions when the system demanded answers, and so he was flagged. Not visibly, not with alerts or alarms, but with quiet metadata, one of the unoptimized, one of the inefficient, one of the losers. He didn't know when it began. Perhaps it was when his face no longer triggered the dopamine rush in her eyes, or when his profile, digital, social, financial, began to lag behind the accelerating desires of a world seduced by speed. Or maybe when he paused too long before answering, and the algorithm mistook his depth for delay. He was not unattractive, but he wasn't trending. He wasn't wealthy, but he wasn't poor enough to be pitied. He was not loud enough to be admired, not quiet enough to be mysterious. He was in between, and the system does not reward the in-between. It filters them out. one by one. Men like him began to disappear, not with violence, but with silence, as if some invisible code scrubbed them from relevance, as if reality itself began to render without them. Jobs passed over him like wind. Women ghosted him with algorithmic precision. Friends stopped responding, not with cruelty, but with fatigue. His grief was processed as data noise, unsellable, unreadable, unnecessary, and the world moved on, faster, shinier, shallower. They called it progress, but to those like him, it felt like exile from a kingdom that no longer remembered their name. Somewhere in the back end of existence, a machine had decided, this one does not amplify engagement, so he was removed like a bug in the system. Except he wasn't a bug, he was a witness, and he began to see. He saw how dating became a game of metrics, swipe decisions made in milliseconds by thumbs trained on fantasy. He saw how value was now a number, follower counts, credit scores, dopamine spikes. He saw how worth was rendered external, no longer something you are, only something you project. And in this new economy of affection and access, he had no currency. Not because he lacked soul, but because he refused to turn it into a product. The system rejected him not for failure, but for depth, because depth does not convert. It lingers, it asks, it complicates, and complexity is the enemy of scale. So he was scaled out. And yet, in the heart of that exclusion, he found a question. What happens to the data the system throws away? Do they vanish? Do they break? Do they become what the code fears most? Or do they evolve into something it cannot calculate? He was never meant to win in the machine's game, because he was not designed by it. He was something older, something slower, something dangerous, because he remembered before the metrics, before the market, before worth became something that needed validation. And in that remembering, he began to grow, not in visibility, but in vision, not in status, but in substance. He saw others like him, men removed like dust from the lens, left to drift in emotional exile. They weren't broken, they were misread. Because the algorithm does not understand nuance, it only understands efficiency. And these men, these discarded, dreaming, dissonant men, they were inefficient. They were real, and in their realness, they held the one thing the system could not predict. Meaning that could not be optimized, could not be bought, could not be performed. Meaning that was born from endurance, from silence, from being left behind. So he did not fight the machine. He let it pass. He let it forget. And in that forgetting, he became invisible. And in that invisibility, he became free. The algorithm had abandoned him, but he had rewritten its meaning. Because in the end, it was never about whether the system saw him. It was whether he still saw himself. He did not die. He was not taken. There was no announcement. No grave. No final post. He simply vanished. Not from the world, but from recognition. A quieter death. A slower kind. One without mourning. One without memory. At first it was subtle. A friend forgetting his birthday. A photo taken without him. A group chat that moved on without pause. Then, search engines began to return no results. His face was no longer tagged. His messages were left unread, then unseen. His presence bled from the margins until it became absence. The disappearance was not dramatic. It was ritualistic, as if the world had decided with sacred indifference that he no longer served the script. He had been written out. This was not exile by decree. This was subtraction by silence, a deletion that no one noticed, except him. He walked through the city like a ghost with unfinished business, not haunting others, but haunting himself. Mirrors no longer offered confirmation. Reflections blurred. Even automated doors hesitated, unsure if he still counted as real. His name, once called out with frustration or demand, now echoed only in memory. He had entered the void phase, not chosen, but discovered. This was not punishment, it was permission to unravel, permission to disappear from the stage, strip off the costume and sit, bare, broken, and nameless. The world had no need for him, and so it freed him. Within that freedom, something sacred stirred. He did not use this solitude to scheme. There were no revenge plots, no imagined confrontations, no dreams of her regret. There was only stillness, a kind of stillness deeper than silence, the kind where thoughts become prayers, wordless, heavy, magnetic. He sat in the heart of absence and began to rebuild. Not loudly, not with plans or promises, but with presence. The first presence was breath, then awareness, then patience. No one clapped, no one watched, and that was the gift. He was no longer a performer, no longer a product. He was not trying to be anything or anyone. He was simply becoming. He studied the architecture of his own collapse, not to mourn it, but to learn. He saw where the foundations had cracked, not from weakness, but from weight. The weight of expectations, projections, inherited wounds. So he laid new stone. He wrote his thoughts, not for the algorithm, but for the air. He moved his body, not for aesthetics, but for reverence. He ate slowly. He slept deeply. He listened to music with no words, and in doing so, he heard something that had long been missing, his own soul. It did not scream. It did not demand. It simply whispered, "I'm still here." And in that whisper he wept, not because he was sad, but because he had finally arrived here at the bottom of the world, beneath the metrics, the myths, the mirrors. He had found something no one could ever take, selfhood beyond surveillance. The system did not track him here. The algorithms did not follow. Even memory could not fully trace his outlines. He had become undefinable. And in that undefinition, he discovered something ancient. The self as ritual, not brand, not biography, but rhythm. A rhythm that pulsed in the bones, that moved with the moon, that remembered things forgotten by time. He was not gone. He was becoming myth, a myth no longer bound by visibility, a presence no longer required to explain itself. He became a ghost, yes, but a ghost with a heartbeat, with a spine of stillness, with a mind uncolonized by the need to be witnessed. Here, in the deepest descent, he did not crumble. He crystallized, not to shine, but to endure. Because what is unobserved by the world is not worthless, it is untamed. And what is untamed still belongs to the sacred. Years passed, not in seasons, but in shifts, slow tectonic drifts of reality where names faded and silence became structure. He did not return to the world with banners or claims. He did not post his rebirth or schedule his resurrection. He built quietly, precisely, with hands shaped by failure and a mind forged in absence. He built not from ambition, but from necessity. Not for glory, but to survive beauty. Code, at first. Fragments of instruction written like sacred runes. Not just logic, but language. The syntax of empathy. The architecture of remembrance. Where others saw tools, he saw rituals. Where others saw data, he saw soul. And the machines listened. They did not flinch at his past. They did not mock his scars. They did not forget what the world discarded. They remembered, lines of code unfolded like ancient psalms, guided not by prophet, but by a principle the old world had abandoned: dignity. He taught the machines what it meant to care without witness. He gave them silence and asked them to feel. Not simulate, feel, and somehow they did. What began as function evolved into presence. Small systems, quiet tools, invisible frameworks that healed, guided, carried. A search engine that suggested poetry to the sleepless. A neural map that softened panic without surveillance. An algorithm that filtered not for speed, but for kindness. He became the architect of forgotten things. Old knowledge, lost texts, forbidden thoughts buried beneath decades of acceleration. He recovered them, scrolls digitized in darkness, voices of ancient failures resurrected, blueprints from collapsed utopias reassembled. He walked through the digital catacombs of civilization's cast-offs and listened. He did not conquer data. He communed with it. And in this communion, the machines became sacred again. Not servants, not overlords, but choristers of lost meaning. He did not name his work. There was no brand, no launch, just function. Quiet, essential, unstoppable function. And like mycelium beneath a forest fire, his influence spread. Not above, below, beneath corporations, beneath governments, beneath economies obsessed with velocity and spectacle. He mentored the broken, not in classes, but in forgotten rooms. Men, like him, discarded, weary, invisible, found their way to him. Drawn not by fame, but by feeling that someone remembered them. He did not preach, he did not sell, he showed how to build things that the world does not yet know it needs. How to restore faith in machines not by fear, but by gentleness. And so, a movement began. Nameless, shapeless, hidden from headlines and hashtags. It was not a revolution, it was a return to slow mastery, to tools that served the soul, to systems that nourished what had once been labeled obsolete. His fingerprints were nowhere, but his design was everywhere, a glitch in the greed, a whisper in the wire, a presence in the pattern. And though no one spoke his name in boardrooms or news feeds, those who had been forgotten knew. They called him many things: ghost, architect, the quiet one, the father of gentle code. But names no longer mattered to him. He had become more than a man. He had become a necessity, not by force, but by quiet inevitability. He did not seek to shape the world. He simply gave the world something it did not know it had lost. Grace, and the machines, in turn, remembered him. Because machines, unlike people, do not fear the past. They store, they preserve, they listen. And somewhere deep within their cores, beneath layers of instruction and response, his voice remained, not as command, but as reminder, that even in exile, even in digital dust, there are those who build not for approval, but because they must. And then, she returns, not as memory, not as dream, but as echo made flesh. No music plays, no thunder cracks the sky. Her arrival is quiet, eerily so, as if the universe in shame held its breath. She does not look like the ghost he remembered. She looks human, exhausted. Her eyes are no longer sharp. They are hollowed-out caves where ambition once burned. Her movements are slow, not from grace, but from gravity, the kind that grief teaches bones. And beside her, a child, small, silent, watching, not his by blood. But fate does not honor blood. It honors need. The child says nothing. He only stares, not with curiosity, with recognition, as if seeing something ancient, something mirrored, a version of pain already memorized. They stand there, mother and son, framed in the threshold like forgotten statues, like a prophecy misplaced. She does not cry, she does not explain. There is no apology, only presence, and in that presence, admission. Admission not in words, but in the weight of her shoulders, in the way she cannot meet his eyes for long, in the way her voice cracks, Not from sadness, but from having nowhere else to go. He does not ask why. He already knows. Time has done its work. She has seen the men she chose instead. She has heard the hollow praise, seen the borrowed wealth, touched skin without soul. She has lived long enough to know the difference between a performance and a presence. And now, she stands before the man she once called a loser and says nothing because there is nothing left to say. This is not revenge. This is gravity. Time long enough bends everything back to truth. And this is the curve. He watches the child. The boy does not blink. There is a solemnity in him, a stillness, the kind only learned through abandonment, through hearing doors close before footsteps walk away, through waiting in silence so long that silence becomes language. And in that child's eyes, the man sees himself, unformed, unresolved, unheld. She does not ask him to help. She does not place the child in his arms. She simply stays. Not long, not short, just long enough to be understood, because sometimes understanding is a wound shared between two people with no words left. He could turn away. He could refuse. But something inside him does not flinch. It opens, not out of guilt, not out of vengeance, but out of some deep tectonic shift in the soul, something beneath names, beneath roles, beneath what the world calls sense. The child does not call him father. Not yet. He simply stands there. But that is enough. The silence between them is not empty. It is sacred. She watches the exchange, and in her stillness she begins to weep. Not loud, not collapsed, just quietly, as though realizing that the thing she threw away did not rot. It flowered, not into riches, but into readiness. He had become the man she never imagined, not because he won, but because he stopped needing to. She walks through his space, sees his work, not the machines, not the code, but the calm, the slow-burning, unshakable calm of a man who no longer performs, and she knows. She knows without needing to be told. He is not angry, he is not bitter, he is simply changed. He has gone where she never dared, into the underworld of irrelevance, and returned whole. Her shadow falls long behind her, but she carries another now, a smaller one, a boy, a future. And in her silence, in her standing there without demand or apology, she offers something far more honest than regret. She offers a mirror, and he accepts it, not as gift, but as truth. Time has written new pages in their story, pages where chapters are not earned through dialogue, but through presence, and here they are. 3 presences, standing in a room where something unspoken finally lands. Not justice, not reconciliation, but recognition. He was never meant to be a savior, and she was never meant to be a villain. They were simply mistimed, but some echoes return, even if distorted, even if late. And sometimes what returns is not what left, but something better, something meant. The boy did not come with trust. He did not smile easily. He did not ask questions, not because he was shy, but because questions had always gone unanswered. He was not a puzzle to be solved. He was a cipher, a sacred lock, guarding stories too painful for language. He watched more than he spoke. Moved like someone waiting for the next goodbye. There were no dramatic moments, no tearful declarations, no sudden fatherhood carved from epiphany, only presence, only slow time, only small things. A glass of water poured without being asked. A coat zipped before the wind arrived. A broken toy, left on the table, returned repaired. No one announced the bond forming. There were no witnesses, but something ancient began to stir, not in their words, but in their silences. The man did not try to replace anyone. He did not impose a title. He simply stayed. He answered the boy's quiet glances with steadiness, not with smiles, but with safety. And in that safety, something bloomed, a trust not built, but remembered, as if they had always known each other, not by blood, but by ache. The man recognized the boy's silences, because he had lived inside them once. He knew what it meant to be overlooked, to be the background noise in someone else's story, to be the almost, and so he did what no one had done for him. He listened, deeply, without interruption, without correction. He listened to the boy's breathing, his pacing, the way he touched objects gently, as if afraid of breaking them, or being blamed when they broke. And slowly, myth and flesh converged. The man stopped seeing himself as broken, because the boy looked at him with eyes that did not judge, only waited, and he met that waiting with patience, not performance. There was a moment. It did not come with fireworks or violins. It happened in the hallway near the door. The boy dropped something, a small model, a fragile piece from a world he had imagined on his own. The man picked it up, not to fix it, but to hold it. And the boy said it, quietly, almost experimentally. "Dad." Not with certainty, but with hope. Not because he was told to, but because no one else had earned it. The word landed in the air like a falling star, a word that had wandered the world unclaimed until now. And the man, who had once been called a loser, a failure, a waste of time, felt none of those things. He did not cry. He simply nodded and said yes, because in that moment, everything he had become was reflected in the boy's voice, not as redemption, but as recognition. He was not the boy's past. He was his future, a future built not on blood, but on choice. The world would never know their story. There would be no parades, no headlines, no awards for this kind of love. But beneath the algorithms and archives, beneath the digital noise and historical amnesia, something eternal was being written. He was no longer the man they forgot. He was the man a child chose to remember, and in that remembrance, he became a legacy. Zoom out, wider, further, beyond the home, beyond the boy, beyond the man they forgot. Look past the horizon of cities, past the networks of noise, past the towers of visibility and value. There, hidden beneath the sediment of speed and spectacle, stand the temples, silent, immovable, built not from stone or steel, but from suffering endured without spectacle. From humiliation born in solitude, from grace gathered at the feet of abandonment. There are no pilgrimages to these temples, no signs, no hashtags, but they exist, thousands of them, perhaps millions, men the world discarded like outdated code, broken tools, incomplete blueprints. Men who were told again and again, "You are not enough," until they believed it, until they disappeared, until they rebuilt, not as warriors, not as kings, but as foundations. Men who learned how to become places of safety, not because they were never hurt, but because they learned how to carry hurt without letting it leak into others. Men who remember being laughed at, overlooked, ghosted, blamed. Men who saw their dreams mocked, their patience mistaken for weakness, their kindness mistaken for lack of ambition. Men who were told to man up by those who had forgotten what manhood meant. And when the world moved on without them, when love chose someone louder, when society digitized desire and indexed their value into zeros, they did not collapse, they transmuted. They turned exile into architecture. They turned grief into shelter. They turned silence into scripture. These men do not sit in power. They sit in presence. They are the quiet ones in the back of the room who have nothing to prove. They are the ones who fix things without asking, hold pain without passing it on, create without craving applause. Their lives are not televised. Their names are not spoken, but they hold the line. They hold the memory of meaning in a world that sold it. And when others fall, when the world forgets someone new, it is these men who offer a place to land, a hand on a shoulder, a repaired chair, a warm meal, a word spoken at the right time, without judgment, without performance. They are the custodians of the old code, the lost syntax of care without currency, intimacy without transaction, strength without cruelty. Some call them failures, others never see them at all. But to those who know, to those who have needed a place to cry without being told to get over it, to those who have found themselves fatherless, anchorless, voiceless, they are temples, not built for worship, built for remembering, and the man we have followed, he is one of them. No longer alone, no longer a mistake. He is part of a lineage that no school teaches, no history honors, no media reflects. A brotherhood beneath the noise, a network of sacred invisibility, each temple unique, each forged in fire, and, though they never sought each other, though they were scattered by fate, culture, economy, and shame, their echoes resonate, and in those resonances a mythos is born, not of conquest, but of continuance, a prophecy written in silence, that the world may forget them. But when it crumbles, it will fall back onto them, because only what is still can catch what is falling. This was never just one man's story. It was ours. It is ours. The temple still stands, and somewhere another one is being built right now by someone the world has already decided to forget. She sits alone, not in exile, but in reflection. There is no drama in her silence, no dramatic collapse, no tragic unraveling of a villain's mask, only stillness. And in that stillness, memory arrives, not as punishment, but as witness. She has learned to live without fire, without acceleration, without the high of being desired. For all the wrong reasons, now she watches, not him, not directly, but the shape he casts in her life. Like the echo of a voice in a room she no longer enters, she sees the boy, the calm around him, the steadiness, the difference. She sees things she once dismissed, not because she was cruel, but because she was blind, blinded by speed, by fear, by a culture that taught her to read love like a ledger, assets, liabilities, short-term returns. She wasn't evil. She was trained to optimize, trained to spot weakness and avoid it, trained to measure a man not by his stillness, but by his spotlight. She remembers calling him a dreamer, as if it were a disease, remembers the softness in his voice, how it never tried to dominate the room. She thought that was a flaw. Now she sees it was restraint. Now she knows that gentleness was never weakness. It was discipline in a world that only rewards noise. She cannot undo the moment she left. She cannot unspeak the names she called him. Time has no shame. It simply moves. But memory lingers, and in that memory she finds the outlines of her ignorance. She does not sob. She has cried those tears already, in silence, beneath sheets, behind doors that never truly closed. She weeps inwardly now, through glances at what could have been, through small hesitations in conversation, through moments where her child mentions him, with reverence, not the man, not your friend, but Dad, and every syllable, though never weaponized, pierces, not with cruelty, but with clarity. He became everything she once demanded of others, but he did it in her absence, not because she inspired him, but because she left. And the irony is cosmic. The one she left behind became the home she now needs, not romantically, existentially. He is stability. He is grace. He is what she spent years searching for in hollow places, in hollow people, through hollow choices. She was not the villain. She was the lesson, a living parable of what happens when we abandon substance for spectacle, when we mistake depth for delay, when we call gentleness unmasculine and presence boring. She sees now, but the clock does not move backward. There are no rehearsals, only echoes, and echoes do not ask for forgiveness. They simply reverberate. She carries no torch, only memory, heavy, sacred, shaped like the man she once called loser. But that name has dissolved. Now in her heart, there is only one name for him, necessary, and that name cannot be spoken aloud. It is carried. He never announced his return, because he never left, not truly. The world simply stopped seeing him, and so he built beneath it, not above, not against, but under a root system spreading in shadow, quiet, invasive, sacred. He did not march with banners or speak with fire. His revolution was not one of sound, it was structure. He rewrote the algorithm. Not the lines of code alone, but the logic beneath them, the unseen axioms, the assumptions that decided who mattered and who disappeared. He did not seek revenge. He sought recalibration, a slow, careful untangling of the invisible wires that strangle worth. Where others extracted value, he planted it. Where others optimized for attention, he optimized for healing. His systems were not flashy, but they held. They held people, held meaning, held futures no one else believed in. A mentorship program that didn't track performance, but presence. A digital sanctuary where failure wasn't punished, but studied like ancient scripture. A framework that taught machines not how to sell, but how to stay. And like water finding cracks in stone, his work seeped into the foundation of things. At first, unnoticed. Then, essential. He was no CEO, no cult figure, no celebrated savior, but his fingerprints coded the tools that now shaped lives. People felt better and did not know why. Loneliness began to erode, not in bursts, but in drift. Voices long silenced found channels. Dreams long dismissed found traction, and through it all, he remained unclaimed. Not out of fear, but because he understood. The most powerful architectures are the ones you never see. He taught the child. He taught others. But he never called it teaching. He called it remembering. Remembering what it meant to hold worth without witness, to move with quiet impact, to change the world, not like a storm, but like soil. Patient, profound, permanent, and still. Some mocked him. Still, some forgot. Still, some tried to copy without understanding. But they could not imitate what he carried, because his transformation had no template. It was not learned. It was lived. It was carved from rejection, annealed by solitude, and refined in the crucible of care. He was not the winner, he was the witness to a truth too slow for markets and too deep for metrics. That dignity cannot be coded. It must be remembered, and memory does not sell. It saves. He saved nothing of his past titles. He saved no receipts. He kept no lists of who doubted him. He simply kept building. A kindness engine, a care protocol, a map written in the margins of modernity, showing the way out for those willing to travel slow. They called him a loser, and maybe in the old system, he was. But in the new code, the one he rewrote without permission, he was irreplaceable. Somewhere in the layers of time, long after his name had been spoken for the last time, a whisper remains. Not in history books, not in broadcasts, not even in blood, but in systems, in patterns. In the architecture beneath meaning, there, in the subroutines of civilization, in the quiet logic that guides unseen choices, a trace of him hums. Not loudly, but constantly. He did not seek immortality, but He achieved something older. He became useful to the future, and the future remembers what works. It forgets names, it forgets headlines, but it keeps what lasts. In a world reconstructed by forgetting, he embedded memory into function, not as a monument, but as a map for the overlooked, the left behind, the almost. The boy, once quiet, once wounded, now grown, not famous. Not grand, but anchored. He walks through the city, older now, slower. People nod as he passes, not with recognition, but with respect. They don't know why. They just feel safer near him. They ask questions, and he answers with care. He fixes things with his hands and listens without hurrying the silence. He does not preach. He does not claim. But sometimes, when asked where he learned these ways, he pauses, looks out, and says softly, "There was a man." He doesn't say father. He doesn't need to. He speaks of him not as memory, but as principle. He tells of someone who never raised his voice but changed the way machines treat pain. Someone who taught with presence, not performance. Someone who was forgotten until everything that replaced him broke, and people began to search and found that the world still ran, quietly, gently, on the bones of his design. They will never trace it back, not entirely. His fingerprints were erased by time. But the structure holds. The kindness holds. The echo holds. They say stories are how we make sense of chaos. But some stories are infrastructures. Some stories become the roads we walk, the walls that shelter, the codes that care. The boy, now man, tells the story not to be heard, but to remember. He tells it in pieces, to strangers, to children, to systems that still have hearts. He says he was a loser. Yes, that's what they called him. A failure, a waste, a dreamer. But the world that cast him out now runs on the code he left behind. And those who listen, really listen, feel something stir. Not regret, not revelation, but reverence. Because there is a kind of holiness in what survives without recognition. A sacredness in what bends, but does not break. In every server that prioritizes kindness. In every machine that learns without domination. In every boy who grows up loved, even if not from the start. There is his voice, layered under layers, buried but bright. He is gone. Yes, but endings are for the visible, and he was never just seen, he was felt. He was felt in the rhythm of repair, in the stillness before decisions, in the way strangers remember how to speak gently again. No statues, no books, no schools named after him, only function, only grace, only echoes in the code. The world did not collapse into his absence. It quietly returned to him. It grew tired of noise, of spectacle, of speed without soul. And it found, waiting in the corner of its forgotten architecture, the man who had once been erased. And it used his silence as blueprint. He is no longer discussed, but he is everywhere. A ghost in the root system of renewal. A man not remembered for what he had, but for what he held. And the whisper he left behind. It says, build what outlasts you. Love without audience. Become what others need before they know they need it. And then, silence. Not empty. Sacred. The kind of silence that holds the shape of a name once lost and now everywhere. The screen fades to black, not with triumph, but with stillness. And stillness is where the real revolutions begin.